In every war, there are battles that become legendary: Normandy, Stalingrad, Midway, Iwo Jima. But some of history's greatest acts of courage never happened on a battlefield at all. They took place behind barbed wire, inside prison camps, far from tanks, artillery, and advancing armies. Another war unfolded in silence, a battle fought with patience instead of bullets, intelligence instead of firepower, and hope instead of overwhelming force. One of those battles would eventually produce the most daring prison escape of the Second World War. An operation so ambitious that even the German High Command believed it was impossible. An escape that would humiliate the Nazi regime before the entire world. And a story that remains one of the greatest examples of human determination ever recorded. It all began inside a prison camp called Stalag Luft III. Located near the town of Sagan in occupied Poland, today part of Western Poland, the camp was unlike any ordinary prisoner of war facility. The men imprisoned there were not infantry soldiers. They were Allied airmen, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, radio operators, men whose aircraft had been shot down over occupied Europe. The Germans knew exactly who these prisoners were: military officers, highly trained, resourceful, accustomed to solving problems under pressure. Many had already attempted escapes from previous prison camps. Keeping such men imprisoned would never be easy. Because of that, the Luftwaffe designed Stalag Luft III with one purpose above all else: to make escape impossible. Every aspect of the camp reflected that goal. The barracks were deliberately raised above the ground on concrete supports. At first glance, this seemed like an ordinary construction decision. In reality, it served a very specific purpose. If prisoners attempted digging tunnels beneath their barracks, guards could immediately notice disturbed soil beneath the buildings. The Germans wanted every tunnel discovered before it had any chance of succeeding. The camp also sat on loose yellow sand rather than ordinary dirt. This wasn't an accident either. Yellow sand created enormous problems for tunneling. It constantly collapsed. It required extensive reinforcement. More importantly, its bright color made it impossible to hide if scattered around the camp. Any prisoner carrying handfuls of yellow sand on his clothing immediately attracted attention. Microphones were reportedly buried underground near sections of the perimeter fence. German engineers believed these primitive listening devices could detect the sounds of digging. Watchtowers overlooked every corner of the compound. Armed guards patrolled continuously. Powerful floodlights illuminated the fences every night. Multiple rows of barbed wire surrounded the camp. Escape, the Germans believed, had become mathematically impossible. Many prisoners reached exactly the opposite conclusion. If the Germans had gone to such extraordinary lengths, there had to be a way. Among those arriving at Stalag Luft III during 1943 was a Royal Air Force squadron leader named Roger Bushell. At first glance, Bushell hardly appeared extraordinary. He wasn't physically imposing. He wasn't loud. He didn't seek unnecessary attention. But beneath that calm exterior lay one of the most determined escape organizers in military history. Long before arriving at Stalag Luft III, Bushell had already attempted escaping from German captivity several times. He had become almost obsessed with one idea: no prisoner should simply wait for the war to end. Every escape accomplished far more than returning one soldier to Allied lines. Each attempt forced Germany to divert enormous manpower toward security. Guards, police, railway inspectors, border patrols, search teams, dogs, vehicles, aircraft. Resources spent hunting escaped prisoners could no longer be used at the front. Even failed escape attempts benefited the Allied war effort. Bushell understood this perfectly. Soon after arriving at the camp, he quietly began identifying men who shared his thinking: engineers, miners, carpenters, forgers, tailors, language experts, former railway workers. Each possessed skills that might someday prove useful. Rather than allowing prisoners to work independently, Bushell envisioned something unprecedented, an escape operation on an industrial scale. Not one man, not 10, hundreds. His proposal astonished nearly everyone who heard it. The Germans expected occasional escape attempts. They did not expect an organized underground organization operating beneath their noses. Bushell's fellow prisoners soon began referring to him by a simple nickname, Big X. The title reflected his role as overall commander of every escape operation inside the camp. Nothing happened without his approval. Nothing. Under his leadership, an astonishing secret organization slowly emerged. It resembled a small military headquarters hidden inside a prison. Committees formed. Departments appeared. Responsibilities became carefully assigned. Some prisoners specialized in digging. Others manufactured civilian clothing. Some forged passports. Others studied railway schedules across occupied Europe. Mapmakers secretly reproduced detailed European maps. Language specialists coached escapees in German customs and pronunciation. Every task mattered. Every volunteer understood that discovery could mean severe punishment or worse. Then came Bushell's boldest decision. One tunnel wouldn't be enough. If the Germans discovered it, months of work would vanish overnight. So instead, he ordered the construction of 3 separate tunnels. Each received a simple code name: Tom, Dick, Harry. The Germans never imagined prisoners would attempt 3 enormous tunneling projects simultaneously. That misunderstanding became one of the operation's greatest advantages. Construction began in complete secrecy. Immediately, enormous problems emerged. The tunnels needed to reach beyond the camp perimeter. That meant lengths exceeding 300 feet. No ordinary hand tools existed. Prisoners improvised everything. Bedboards became tunnel supports. Mess tins became shovels. Milk cans transformed into ventilation equipment. Pieces of scrap metal became digging tools. Every object inside the camp suddenly possessed a second purpose. The tunnels themselves had to remain incredibly small, only large enough for one man to crawl through at a time. Working underground became physically exhausting. Temperatures rose rapidly. Fresh air disappeared. Claustrophobia became a constant enemy. Many diggers spent hours lying almost flat while slowly scraping away sand one handful at a time. Collapse remained an ever-present danger. One mistake, one weak support, could bury men alive beneath the camp. Ventilation quickly became another serious problem. Without fresh air, workers underground would eventually suffocate. Again, prisoners improvised. Using discarded food tins, wood, cloth, and scavenged materials, they built an ingenious hand-operated air pump capable of forcing oxygen hundreds of feet through narrow pipes into the tunnels. It worked surprisingly well. Electric lighting posed another challenge. Digging entirely by candlelight proved far too dangerous. Eventually, prisoners secretly connected stolen electrical wire into the camp's power supply, running lights deep beneath the ground. The tunnels gradually became remarkable feats of engineering. But engineering solved only half the problem. Every shovel of sand removed from underground had to go somewhere, and that presented perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Over 300 tons of yellow sand would eventually need to disappear, without a single German guard becoming suspicious. At first glance, that seemed utterly impossible. Yet the prisoners already had a plan, one so ingenious that guards walked past it every single day, without realizing they were watching one of history's greatest escape operations unfold.
Wow.
As the weeks turned into months, Stalag Luft III appeared perfectly ordinary from the outside. Every morning, German guards counted the prisoners. The men lined up in neat rows, answered roll call, ate their meals, played sports, attended classes, read books, and walked around the compound under the watchful eyes of armed sentries. To the guards, life inside the camp had settled into a predictable routine. Nothing seemed unusual. That illusion was exactly what Roger Bushell wanted. Beneath the surface, Stalingrad III had become one of the largest secret construction sites in occupied Europe. More than 600 prisoners were now involved in one way or another. Some never touched a shovel. Others never entered the tunnels. Yet every man contributed something. The operation had grown so large that it resembled an underground military organization. There were engineers, carpenters, electricians, blacksmiths, tailors, artists, chemists, linguists, mapmakers, counterfeiters, even intelligence officers. Each group worked independently, often without knowing the full details of the other's responsibilities. If one section were discovered, the entire operation might still survive. Compartmentalization became one of the escape's greatest strengths. The tunnels themselves demanded almost constant attention. Digging through the loose yellow sand proved far more difficult than anyone had imagined. The walls constantly threatened to collapse. The deeper the tunnels extended beneath the camp, the more fragile they became. Every few feet required wooden supports. Thousands of them. Since no lumber was available, the prisoners quietly dismantled parts of their own barracks. Bed slats disappeared one by one. Shelves became support beams. Hidden sections of walls slowly vanished. The remarkable part wasn't that wood disappeared. It was that the Germans never noticed. Whenever inspections approached, the prisoners carefully rearranged furniture to hide missing sections. Fresh paint concealed alterations. Blankets covered weakened walls. What looked like ordinary barracks slowly transformed into warehouses, supplying one of history's most ambitious tunneling projects. Ventilation remained another constant struggle. The tunnels stretched farther every week. Simply breathing underground became increasingly difficult. The homemade air pump operated continuously whenever men worked below. Constructed from discarded food tins, canvas, scrap rubber, and improvised valves, the device pushed fresh air through hundreds of feet of narrow piping. Without it, the diggers would have suffocated. Lighting posed similar challenges. Working in total darkness was impossible. Candles produced dangerous smoke and consumed valuable oxygen. The prisoners devised another extraordinary solution. Using stolen electrical wire, improvised switches, and salvaged light bulbs, they secretly connected the tunnels to the camp's electrical system. Now, hundreds of feet beneath the German guards' boots, electric lights illuminated an underground world the Nazis never suspected existed. Yet none of these engineering problems compared to the greatest challenge of all: the sand. Every shovel removed from the tunnel produced another pile of bright yellow earth. By the time the project finished, nearly 200 tons would need to disappear. The Germans had intentionally built the camp on yellow sand because they believed it could never be hidden. If even a small amount appeared on the surface, guards would immediately recognize it. Roger Bushell's team responded with astonishing creativity. Several prisoners designed small cloth bags that could be worn beneath their trousers. The bags hung inside each pant leg, suspended by strings tied around the waist. Tiny holes at the bottom allowed sand to escape gradually. Throughout the day, prisoners casually walked around the compound, discreetly pulling release cords hidden inside their pockets. As they walked, small amounts of yellow sand trickled onto gardens, pathways, flower beds, and sports fields. The wind scattered it naturally. No noticeable piles ever formed. Guards watched them every day. They never realized hundreds of prisoners were quietly emptying an entire tunnel beneath their feet. The prisoners jokingly referred to themselves as penguins because they waddled awkwardly while carrying hidden sand inside their trousers. The nickname quickly spread throughout the camp. Everyone understood its meaning. Even more remarkable methods followed. Some sand disappeared beneath vegetable gardens. Some filled low areas around buildings. Some vanished beneath newly created pathways. Every grain became another tiny victory against the Germans. Meanwhile, other departments worked just as tirelessly. Escaping the camp represented only the beginning. Once outside, hundreds of miles of occupied Europe still separated the prisoners from freedom. Without proper documents, they would almost certainly be captured within hours. Forgers therefore began producing astonishingly realistic identification papers. Blank forms were secretly copied. Official stamps were carved by hand using scraps of rubber and wood. Ink mixtures were carefully experimented with until they resembled authentic German documents. Old photographs became new identities. Every escaped prisoner would receive an entirely fictional life. Different names, different occupations, different hometowns, different travel permits. Many of these forged documents proved so convincing that later investigators struggled to distinguish them from genuine originals. At the same time, another workshop quietly produced civilian clothing. Escaping while wearing Allied military uniforms guaranteed immediate arrest. Every man needed convincing civilian attire. Old uniforms became jackets. Blankets became coats. Curtains became shirts. Discarded fabric was transformed into hats, scarves, gloves, and trousers. Tailors worked endlessly using handmade needles and carefully preserved thread. The result amazed everyone involved. Prisoners who entered the workshop wearing military uniforms often emerged looking like ordinary European civilians. Maps represented another enormous challenge. Purchasing them was impossible. Printing presses didn't exist. Yet detailed maps remained essential. The prisoners devised ingenious techniques using silk hidden inside Red Cross parcels. Silk possessed enormous advantages. It folded easily, made almost no noise, resisted water, and lasted far longer than ordinary paper. Artists painstakingly copied railway networks, rivers, roads, and national borders onto the fabric. Each escapee would carry maps covering multiple countries. Compasses were manufactured from scavenged razor blades magnetized using improvised electrical equipment. Even tiny details mattered. Buttons concealed tiny files. Shoes received hidden compartments. Playing cards secretly contained pieces of escape maps. No object escaped examination for possible use. Roger Bushell's organization had become astonishingly sophisticated. Yet with so many men involved, secrecy remained increasingly difficult. German inspections occurred frequently, sometimes without warning. Guards entered barracks searching for contraband. Floorboards were lifted. Walls were tapped. Beds overturned. Prisoners stood calmly while German soldiers searched only inches away from hidden entrances leading underground. Several times, discovery came terrifyingly close. Tunnel Tom, the first major project, eventually had to be abandoned after German inspectors discovered its entrance. Months of exhausting labor disappeared overnight. Many prisoners felt crushed. Nearly everything had been lost. Roger Bushell remained completely calm. That had always been part of the plan. They still had Dick. They still had Harry. The operation continued. Later, Tunnel Dick also became unusable when changing camp construction made its completion impossible. Again, months of work vanished. Now everything depended upon a single tunnel. Harry. Every remaining effort focused on its completion. Failure was no longer an option. Night after night, exhausted diggers crawled farther beneath the camp. The tunnel eventually stretched more than 300 feet beneath fences, patrol roads, and guard towers. Every inch represented countless hours of dangerous labor. Finally, in early March 1944, Harry reached the edge of the forest beyond the perimeter. Or so everyone believed. When one of the lead diggers carefully pushed upward toward the surface, an unexpected problem appeared. The tunnel had come up short. Instead of emerging safely beneath thick trees, the exit stopped several yards before the forest line. Anyone climbing out would briefly appear in open ground visible from nearby watchtowers. The discovery stunned everyone. More than a year of work. And the tunnel was still too short. There was no time to begin again. The operation had already been delayed repeatedly. Spring weather threatened to expose everything. German security continued tightening. Buschel gathered his senior organizers. They debated every possibility. Eventually, one difficult decision emerged. The escape would proceed anyway, carefully timed, one man at a time. If the guards remained distracted, everyone might still succeed. If not, the consequences would be catastrophic. March 24, 1944, was selected. The moon would be favorable. Darkness would provide maximum concealment. That afternoon, almost nobody inside Stalag Luft III spoke about ordinary subjects. The atmosphere felt different. Men quietly checked forged documents one final time. Civilian clothing was inspected. Maps folded carefully into hidden pockets. Compasses tested. Small food supplies distributed. Many prisoners wrote letters they knew might never be delivered. Some would reach freedom. Others almost certainly would not. Nobody knew which group they belonged to. As evening approached, Roger Bushel addressed the first escape group. His instructions were simple. No unnecessary risks. No panic. Once outside, everyone would travel independently toward different destinations across occupied Europe. Sweden, Switzerland, Spain, wherever freedom could be found. At exactly the right moment, the trapdoor above Tunnel Harry quietly opened. One prisoner disappeared into the darkness beneath the barracks. Then another. Then another. One by one, the greatest prison escape of the Second World War had begun. As darkness settled over Stalag Luft III on the evening of March 24, 1944, the atmosphere inside the prison camp was unlike anything the German guards had ever witnessed. On the surface, everything appeared perfectly ordinary. The prisoners ate dinner. Some played cards. Others read books or quietly talked with friends before lights out. Guards completed their usual patrols, occasionally shining flashlights through the barracks windows before continuing along the fences. Nothing seemed unusual, yet beneath one of those wooden barracks, history was already unfolding. The entrance to Tunnel Harry had been opened. The first escapees slowly crawled into the narrow passage, carrying forged documents, homemade maps, civilian clothing, and enough determination to risk execution if they were captured. Every movement required absolute silence. The tunnel measured barely 2 feet high. The men couldn't stand. They couldn't even crawl normally. Instead, they pulled themselves forward inch by inch using elbows and knees, dragging small bags of supplies behind them. The journey through Harry took several minutes. For some, it felt like hours. The air remained warm despite the ventilation system. The wooden supports creaked softly under the weight of the earth above. Electric lights illuminated the narrow passage, but nobody lingered. Every second mattered. Eventually, the first man reached the exit. Carefully, he pushed upward. The hatch opened. Cold night air rushed into the tunnel. For a brief moment, freedom lay only a few feet away. Then, a problem emerged. The planners had feared it. Now they saw it with their own eyes. The tunnel had not quite reached the cover of the forest. Instead, the exit opened several yards short of the trees. Anyone leaving would have to sprint across open snow before reaching safety. That exposed ground sat dangerously close to one of the guard towers. The escape could still work, but only if every man timed his movement perfectly. The first prisoner waited. A guard looked away. He climbed out, ran, disappeared into the darkness. The next followed. Then another. One by one, the prisoners emerged into the freezing March night. The process proved painfully slow. Each man waited for the previous escapee to disappear before climbing out himself. Communication traveled back through the tunnel in whispers. Clear. Wait. Guard moving. The operation continued hour after hour. Inside the barracks, the remaining prisoners quietly monitored the schedule. Everything depended upon time. Roger Bushell had hoped more than 200 men might escape before sunrise. Reality proved much slower. The narrow tunnel created a bottleneck. Unexpected delays accumulated. Still, nobody considered stopping. Every successful escape represented another victory. By midnight, dozens of prisoners had vanished into the forests surrounding Stalag Luft III. Each followed carefully prepared escape routes. Some headed toward railway stations. Others planned to steal bicycles. Several intended crossing Germany before reaching neutral Sweden by ship. Others hoped to reach Switzerland through southern Germany. A few even planned journeys lasting hundreds of miles entirely on foot. Every destination required extraordinary courage. Occupied Europe had become one enormous prison. Roadblocks, identity checks, railway police, border patrols, civilian informants. German soldiers filled every major city. Escaping the camp had only been the first challenge. Now came the truly dangerous part. Among those disappearing into the night was Roger Bushell himself. For more than a year, he had lived for this moment. Every plan, every meeting, every tunnel, every forged document. Everything had led here. Bushell intended traveling through Germany before eventually reaching neutral Switzerland. He never imagined how close freedom truly was. Back inside the camp, the escape continued. The count reached 70. Then 71. 72. The organization had accomplished something no prisoner of war camp had ever seen before. Then, at approximately 5 o'clock in the morning, everything changed. A German guard walking near the perimeter noticed something unusual. Fresh footprints crossed the snow. Curious, he followed them. Only moments later, he discovered the tunnel entrance. The alarm exploded across the camp. Searchlights immediately swept the surrounding forest. Sirens shattered the morning silence. Guards raced toward the escape route, while officers desperately tried determining how many prisoners had disappeared. The answer stunned them. 76. 76 Allied officers had escaped from what Germany considered its most secure prison camp. News reached Berlin almost immediately. Senior Nazi officials could scarcely believe it. The embarrassment was enormous. For years, the Germans had proudly claimed Stalag Luft III was escape-proof. Now newspapers across Europe would eventually learn that dozens of Allied prisoners had escaped from beneath the noses of hundreds of guards. The response became immediate. Massive. Unprecedented. The Gestapo joined the search. The SS became involved. Regular army units established roadblocks. Police inspected every railway station. Civilian authorities received photographs and descriptions. Search dogs tracked footprints through forests. Vehicles searched highways. Border crossings tightened overnight. Nearly every available security agency participated in the largest manhunt of the Second World War. For the escapees, every hour became a race against time. Some managed to travel astonishing distances before encountering trouble. Others were arrested within only a few miles of the camp. Many reached railway stations successfully using their forged documents. Some even fooled experienced German inspectors. One escapee calmly shared train compartments with German officers who never suspected they were sitting beside a recently escaped prisoner. Another crossed multiple checkpoints before finally being recognized because of a minor inconsistency in his accent. Every journey became its own remarkable story. Some survived by extraordinary luck. Others fell victim to the smallest mistakes. Roger Bushell traveled with another escapee, attempting to reach Switzerland. For several days, their forged papers worked remarkably well. Then, at a railway station, the Gestapo became suspicious. The two officers were arrested. Bushell's escape ended only days after leaving the camp. Elsewhere, similar stories unfolded. One after another, escapees disappeared into Gestapo custody. Yet despite the enormous manhunt, 3 men accomplished what many believed impossible. They escaped completely. Norwegian pilot Jens Müller and Dutch pilot Bram van der Stok successfully reached neutral territory after extraordinary journeys across occupied Europe. Another escapee, Per Bergsland, also reached safety. Only 3 out of 76. Under normal circumstances, captured officers would simply have been returned to another prison camp. That was the accepted practice under international law. But Adolf Hitler saw the escape differently. He considered it a personal humiliation. Reports describe his reaction as furious. Initially, Hitler reportedly demanded that every recaptured prisoner be executed immediately. Several senior officials argued against the order, warning that murdering Allied prisoners could provoke severe international consequences. Eventually, Hitler modified the decision. Not all the prisoners would die. Only some. The task fell to the Gestapo. Over the following weeks, 50 recaptured officers were removed from prison under the false claim that they were being transferred. Instead, they were driven into isolated countryside locations, shot. Their bodies secretly cremated. The Nazis attempted disguising the murders by claiming the prisoners had been killed while trying to escape again. Almost nobody believed the explanation. When news eventually reached Britain, outrage spread throughout the Allied world. The executions represented a blatant violation of the Geneva Convention. Military leaders vowed those responsible would someday face justice. They kept that promise. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Allied investigators launched one of the most determined war crimes investigations of the post-war era. Detectives spent years tracking down the Gestapo officers responsible for the murders. Many attempted hiding under false identities. Some fled across Germany. Others blended into civilian life. It didn't matter. One by one, they were identified, arrested, placed on trial. Several received death sentences. Others were imprisoned for their roles in the killings. Justice arrived slowly, but it arrived. Ironically, although the escape itself appeared to fail, with only 3 men ultimately reaching freedom, it achieved many of Roger Bushell's original objectives. For weeks, Germany diverted thousands of soldiers, policemen, railway officials, intelligence officers, and Gestapo agents away from the war effort. Rail transportation slowed. Military resources were consumed. Countless hours were spent searching forests, checking documents, and guarding borders instead of supporting frontline operations. The escape became a strategic success despite its terrible human cost. Its legacy only grew after the war. In 1950, Australian author Paul Brickhill, himself a former prisoner at Stalag Luft III, published the best-selling book The Great Escape, introducing the story to millions of readers. 13 years later, the acclaimed film The Great Escape, starring Steve McQueen and an ensemble cast, turned the operation into one of the most famous war stories ever told. Although the movie fictionalized several details for dramatic effect, it preserved the spirit of the extraordinary planning, courage, and determination displayed by the prisoners. Today, visitors can still walk the grounds where Stalag Luft III once stood. Very little of the original camp remains. The tunnels have long since disappeared. The fences are gone. The watchtowers have vanished. But the story remains. Not because 76 men escaped. Not because 3 reached freedom. Not even because 50 paid the ultimate price. The story endures because it demonstrated something the Nazis never truly understood. They believed walls could imprison the human spirit. They believed barbed wire could destroy hope. They believed fear could eliminate the desire for freedom. They were wrong. For more than a year, hundreds of prisoners worked together in absolute secrecy beneath one of the most heavily guarded camps in Europe. They built tunnels where none should have existed, created documents that fooled experienced officials, engineered an escape that humiliated one of history's most ruthless regimes. And although many never returned home, they proved a lesson that still echoes through history. Even behind the strongest walls ever built, the determination to be free, can never truly be imprisoned.